Working the overnight shift at Walmart has its perks. The store is practically empty. Just me and a few colleagues lost in our own thoughts as we organize the shelves. No customers complaining, no rush. Just the peace and quiet of the night. But, there's something about that silence that makes me a little uneasy. Maybe it's the sound of the shopping carts, which seems to echo louder than during the day, or those fluorescent lights that keep flickering, like they're about to burn out. I've gotten used to this routine. The store feels like a second home. I know every aisle, every corner, but every now and then, I find myself glancing over my shoulder just to make sure no one's watching me. It's not like I expect to see someone there. It's just a strange feeling that's hard to explain. Maybe it's the loneliness setting in, or maybe it's just my imagination playing tricks on me. That night, things were as calm as usual. I was in the food section, arranging some cans, when I started to notice how the clock seemed to move slower. Time seems to drag at those hours. The store was so quiet I could hear the sound of my own breathing. Weird, right? But I tried not to think too much about it, focusing on my work instead. Still, for some reason, something felt different that night. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but an uneasy feeling began to grow inside me. A sort of premonition, like something was about to happen. I shook my head, trying to push that feeling away, and continued with what I was doing, convincing myself it was just another ordinary night. After all, what could go wrong in such a familiar place? As I tried to concentrate on my work, I felt a chill run down my spine. That's when I saw him for the first time. He was standing at the end of the aisle, half hidden in the shadows. I couldn't make out his face clearly, but I could feel his eyes on me. He was a middle-aged man with an expression that was hard to read, and something about the way he was watching me made me uncomfortable. I thought maybe he was just looking for something, so I continued with my work, trying to ignore him. But every time I moved to a new aisle, he was there, always at the edge of my vision. No matter where I went, he would show up right after, like a shadow I couldn't shake. At first, I tried not to think much of it. Maybe he was just a weird customer, someone having trouble finding what they needed. But after a while, it became impossible to ignore. I could feel his gaze burning into the back of my neck every time I turned around. And the more I tried to move away, the closer he seemed to get, like he was testing me, seeing how far I would go. When I finally worked up the courage to look directly at him, I noticed he was smiling, but not in a friendly way. It was a smile that didn't reach his eyes, a smile that felt wrong somehow. He took a step toward me, and my heart started racing. I felt a wave of panic rising inside me, but I didn't want to show that I was scared. "Do you need something?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He just stood there, staring at me, not saying a word. My stomach turned, and I knew I had to get out of there, but I didn't want to seem like a coward. So, without waiting for an answer, I turned and started walking quickly to the other side of the store, trying to stay calm but feeling the panic grow with each step. He didn't say anything, but I knew he was following me. I could hear the sound of his footsteps behind me, getting closer. I needed to get out of there, needed to find a way to distance myself from him. But the store that once felt so familiar now seemed like an endless maze. That's when I realized I was alone, and he knew it. I tried to stay calm as I walked, but every time I glanced over my shoulder, there he was, following me closely. His footsteps echoed in the empty aisles, and every time I turned a corner, I hoped he had given up, that he had left. But no, he was always there, always a few steps behind, like he was playing with me, testing my limits. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I knew I needed to do something. I couldn't keep pretending this was normal, that he was just a weird customer. No, he was stalking me, and I was getting more terrified by the second. I quickly turned into one of the aisles, trying to find an escape route, but it seemed like the more I tried to get away, the closer he got. My hands started to shake, and I could barely think straight. All I wanted was to find a way out, anything that would get me away from him. Then I did the only thing that seemed like an option. I hid. I quickly ducked into a narrow aisle, packed with stacked boxes, and crouched down behind one of them, trying to control my breathing. The silence was almost deafening. Every sound seemed amplified, and I was sure he could hear me, that he knew exactly where I was. For a few seconds, everything was quiet, and I almost thought he had given up. But then, I heard his footsteps approaching, slowly, as if he was searching for me. My heart nearly stopped when I saw his shadow stretch across the wall of the aisle. He was close, too close. I huddled down even more, trying to make as little noise as possible. He stopped. I held my breath, hoping he would leave, that he would give up. But he didn't move. He just stood there, as if he could sense my fear, savoring every second of it. I couldn't take it anymore. The panic was overwhelming, and I knew I needed to get out of there before he found me. With my heart in my throat, I suddenly stood up and ran. I ran without looking back, without thinking of anything except putting as much distance as possible between me and that man. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps speeding up, the sound getting closer and closer. I was in total panic, just trying to reach the exit. The store, which once felt like a familiar refuge, was now a nightmare maze, each aisle a new trap, and he was always there, behind me, like a shadow I couldn't shake off. I ran like I never had in my life, the sound of my own footsteps drowning out any other noise around me. Each aisle seemed longer than the last, as if the store was stretching, keeping me trapped in this endless nightmare. The air felt heavy, and my breathing was ragged, but I couldn't stop, couldn't look back. I knew he was there, right behind me, and that was all the push I needed to keep going. Finally, I spotted the main entrance, and for a brief moment, I felt a wave of relief. Those glass doors had never seemed so far away, but at the same time, they were my only way out, my only chance to escape from the man who was chasing me. I knew that if I could just get to the parking lot, I'd have a chance. My car was right there, and the key was already in my hand, my fingers gripping it tightly. I ran with everything I had, almost tripping over my own feet. The automatic doors opened with that familiar sound, and I threw myself out of the store, feeling the cold night air hit my face. The parking lot was almost empty, just a few lights flickering and the cars parked like static shadows. But I didn't have time to pay attention to any of that. My focus was on my car, the only thing standing between me and safety. I ran even faster, almost out of breath, until I finally reached the car. My hands were shaking so much that I almost dropped the key, but by some miracle, I managed to unlock the door and threw myself inside, locking it immediately. It was only then that I realized he was right there, just a few feet away, coming towards me. I turned the key in the ignition. The engine took forever to start, but when it finally roared to life, I felt an indescribable relief. He even pounded on the window, the dull thud of his fist against the glass making me jump, but I was already speeding away. I tore out of the parking lot, not looking back, not caring about anything except getting out of there as fast as I could. As I drove, my heart still racing, the fear began to fade, but the shock didn't. I was safe, but the terror was still with me, clinging to my skin. I knew I needed to tell someone, that I needed to report what had happened, but at that moment all I wanted was to get away, to leave that town, that night, that memory behind. I knew that even though the immediate danger had passed, that experience would haunt me for a long time. The feeling of vulnerability, of being at someone's mercy in the dead of night, was something I would never forget. After driving nonstop for a good few minutes, I finally parked the car at a gas station where there were more people around. I needed to calm down, needed to breathe. My fingers were still trembling, and my heart, though slower, was still pounding in my chest. I sat there for a while, gripping the steering wheel tightly, trying to process what had just happened. After some time, I decided that I couldn't just go home as if nothing had happened. I needed to tell someone, needed to do something. I grabbed my phone and called the police. I tried to explain what had happened, but the words came out jumbled. I managed to give them my location and a basic description of the man who followed me, although I couldn't remember many details. Everything was a bit fuzzy in my head. When the police finally arrived, I went over everything again, this time more calmly, but even then, the feeling of vulnerability was overwhelming. They asked some questions, took down my description, and said they would investigate. But what more could they do? The store was full of cameras, and they promised to check the footage, but I didn't have much hope that it would lead to anything. What really bothered me, what made me uneasy, was the feeling that this man knew exactly what he was doing, like he had done this before. He knew I was alone, knew how to make me feel scared, and worse, knew how to disappear without a trace. That thought gave me chills, and I couldn't shake it from my mind. Going back to work after that seemed impossible. The mere idea of stepping into that store again, of facing that darkness, made me feel sick. Even in the daylight, Walmart would never be the same for me. The police said they would patrol the area more frequently, but that didn't give me much comfort. The reality was that I felt exposed, like he could show up at any moment, anywhere. I knew that no matter how hard I tried to move on, that night would stay with me. The feeling of being hunted, of being an easy target in the silence of the night, wasn't going to disappear anytime soon. And even though I managed to escape, the experience left deep scars that still make me look over my shoulder every time I'm alone. The night shift, which once was just a routine, had now become a constant reminder of how fragile safety can be, especially when the world sleeps and darkness takes over. It's a quiet afternoon, and for the first time, I'm going to Walmart alone. You know that feeling of freedom? Like, wow, I'm growing up. I can do this. That's exactly how I felt. My parents gave me some money to buy a few things, and I already knew exactly what I wanted. It wasn't anything major, just some snacks, maybe a new nail polish. Simple things, but to me, they meant the world. So, I walk into Walmart, and the first thing I notice is the familiar smell of popcorn that always lingers near the entrance. I grab a cart and start walking through the aisles, feeling that nice vibe of making my own choices without anyone rushing me. That's when I see him for the first time. He seemed normal, honestly. Just another guy shopping, right? But as I was picking out some cookies, I noticed him looking in my direction. I didn't think much of it. After all, stores are always full of people, and sometimes you make eye contact with someone by accident. But you know when something just doesn't feel right? I kept seeing him in different aisles. First in the snacks, then in the cosmetic section, and even in electronics where I was just browsing out of curiosity. That's when it started to click. Wait a minute. Why is he everywhere I go? I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just a coincidence, that maybe he was just doing his normal shopping like me. But something inside me couldn't let it go. My heart started beating faster, and that nice feeling of freedom was being replaced by a strange anxiety. It got to the point where I couldn't ignore it anymore. He was clearly following me. I was standing there, looking at some things on the shelf, and I felt that stare again, burning into my back. When I turned around, there he was, pretending to look at something else, but I knew he was watching me. I tried to stay calm. After all, what was I supposed to do? I didn't want to seem crazy, but at the same time, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was really wrong. And that's how my peaceful afternoon started turning into something I would never forget. I tried to keep shopping, but now my mind was racing. Every time I picked up a product, I felt like I was being watched. You know when you can just feel someone's eyes on you? That's exactly what I was feeling. I decided to switch aisles again, trying to lose him. I went to the clothing section, thinking maybe he wouldn't follow me there. But as I pretended to look at some shirts, I saw him on the other side, pretending to look at pants, but clearly keeping an eye on me. My heart started racing. Okay, this is serious, I thought. I was really starting to get scared. My parents always told me to watch out for strange situations, but I never imagined something like this would happen to me. I tried to be smart. I took out my phone and started pretending I was talking to someone, speaking loudly on purpose, like, "Hey, I'm almost done here. Meet me at the entrance in 5 minutes?" All to make it seem like I wasn't alone. But when I glanced over, there he was, still watching me. Even that didn't scare him off. It only made my fear grow. Every step I took, he seemed to take too. My feet were starting to sweat inside my sneakers, and the urge to run was overwhelming, but I knew that could make things worse. I needed to think clearly, but with every move he made, my panic only grew. I started forming a plan. I needed to find someone, anyone who could help me. I looked around, searching for an employee, but it seemed like they had all vanished. I decided that if he got any closer, I would run to the front of the store, where there were always more people. I kept telling myself he was just a creepy guy, that maybe I was just being paranoid, but the fear was real and harder to ignore with each passing second. He was getting closer. Now he wasn't even bothering to pretend. I looked up, and there he was, just a few meters away, with that fixed stare that made my spine tingle. That's when I realized I needed to do something, and fast. I couldn't let him catch me off guard. Without thinking much, I pushed my cart in his direction, as if I was just trying to move around to grab something else, and turned the other way, walking quickly, almost running. I needed to find help. Every step I took felt heavier, like the ground was trying to pull me down. And the scariest part? Even with all of this, I knew he was still following me. I ran as fast as I could until I found a female employee near the checkout lanes. She was arranging some shelves with those packs of gum and candy. My voice came out shaky as I asked, "Hi, excuse me, can you help me? I think there's a man following me." She looked at me in surprise, probably because I seemed pretty terrified, and asked if I was sure. Before I could answer, I glanced over my shoulder and, of course, there he was standing near one of the columns, pretending to look at an ad. My heart jumped into my throat, and all I could do was point in his direction. The employee immediately changed her expression, becoming more serious. She told me to stay calm and asked me to stay by her side. She called another employee over the radio and asked them to come quickly. I started to feel a bit of relief, thinking that everything was finally going to be okay. But just as the employee looked in the direction I had pointed, the guy was gone. He had simply vanished between the aisles, as if he had never been there. I was speechless. How did he manage to disappear so quickly? And why did that only make me more terrified? The employee tried to reassure me, saying that security would take a look, but I could see that she didn't really know what to do either. She suggested I finish my shopping quickly and leave, just to be safe. I wanted to believe that would be enough, but the feeling that he was still around wouldn't leave me alone. I thanked her, grabbed my things, and headed toward the checkout lanes, trying to seem calm, but inside, I was a mess. Every second that passed, I felt like he was going to show up again, out of nowhere, maybe closer, maybe with that creepy expression. But as I checked out my purchases, I didn't see any sign of him. Nothing. It was like he had evaporated. I started convincing myself that it was all just a big misunderstanding, that maybe I had overreacted, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But then, as I was about to walk out the door, that cold fear rushed back. You know when you're sure something bad is about to happen? I felt that again, like he was waiting for me outside, just waiting for me to let my guard down. I looked around one more time, trying to see if he was there, hiding among the people, but I couldn't spot anything. I knew I had to get out of there, but every step toward the exit felt like a challenge. And even after everything, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. As soon as I passed through the automatic doors of Walmart and entered the mall, my sense of relief only lasted a few seconds. The cold air from the mall's air conditioning hit me, but it was nothing compared to the chill of fear that ran down my spine when I saw him again. Yes, he was there once more on the other side of the food court, pretending to look at a menu. He was persistent, I had to admit that. But now it wasn't just persistence. It was something much more sinister. How did he know I would come to the mall? Had he been watching me the whole time? My hands started trembling, but I knew I couldn't let panic take over. I needed a plan, and fast. I looked around, trying to decide where I could hide or, better yet, where I could find help. There were a lot of people around, which gave me a bit of security. He wouldn't try anything in public, right? Without thinking twice, I walked into the first store I saw, one of those clothing stores where the racks are tall, and you can hide among the clothes. I headed straight to the back of the store, trying to look busy, but keeping an eye on the entrance. I needed to see if he would follow me, and sure enough, he did. The fear gripped me, but I took a deep breath and tried to appear casual as I moved between the racks. There he was, like a shadow, always lurking. It was as if every move I made was mirrored by him. I was on the verge of freaking out, but I knew I couldn't. If I showed I was scared, it would only encourage him more. I had to be smart, Suddenly, I had an idea. I grabbed a random shirt and went to one of the sales associates, pretending I needed help with the size. While she talked, I started scanning the area, looking for an exit. The store had two entrances, one that led to the main corridor and another smaller one that led to a nearly deserted side hallway. He was near the main entrance, which meant my best chance was to slip out through the side. I thanked the associate, holding onto the shirt as if I was really interested in it, and started walking slowly toward the side exit. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like everyone could hear it. As I neared the door, I took one last look back. He was approaching the associate who had helped me, maybe asking about me. That was my cue. As soon as he turned his back, I slipped out through the side door, almost running down the empty hallway. My only hope was to find an emergency exit or a store where I could really hide. But before I could get very far, I heard footsteps behind me. He had seen me leave and was coming after me again. My mind was racing. I had nowhere to run, and he was getting closer. I needed to find a way out before it was too late. His footsteps grew louder, getting closer with every second. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel the pulse in my ears. I didn't have much time. I looked around desperately, trying to find an exit, anything that could get me out of there. That's when I saw the customer service sign hanging at the back of an electronics store. It was my only chance. Without thinking twice, I ran toward the store, slipping between the shelves of headphones and cell phones. Behind the counter, I saw an older woman with a calm demeanor, as if nothing could shake her day. I reached the counter almost out of breath, my voice coming out in an urgent whisper. "Please, there's a man following me. I need help now." She looked at me with a mix of concern and surprise, but before she could respond, I heard his footsteps entering the store. I had no choice. I crouched down behind the counter, trying to hide as much as possible. The employee looked toward the door and then back at me, immediately grasping the seriousness of the situation. She discreetly signaled to a coworker, a younger guy, who was on the other side of the store. He came over to the counter, and she whispered something to him. Without hesitation, he walked out through the side door, probably to get security. Meanwhile, all I could think about was what would happen if he found me there. Time seemed to pass in slow motion. Every second felt like an eternity. I could hear my own heartbeat, my heavy breathing, trying to control the panic. From my hiding spot, I heard him approach the counter, asking about a girl he was looking for. The employee remained calm, told him she hadn't seen anyone and that he might be mistaken, but he kept insisting, getting more and more irritated, and I could feel that he was losing patience. I was on the verge of being discovered. Then, suddenly, I heard a firm voice from the store entrance. "Sir, could you please come with us?" It was security. Two men approached him, and I finally felt a wave of relief. He hesitated for a moment, as if considering what to do, but in the end, he let the security guards lead him out of the store. I stayed hidden until I was sure he was gone. When I finally stood up, my legs were shaking, as if I was about to collapse at any moment. The employee offered me a glass of water and stayed with me until security assured me that he had been escorted out of the mall. When my parents arrived, I was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. I felt safe again, but the fear was still there, deep down, reminding me that danger can lurk, even in the most ordinary places. We left the mall, and as I got into the car, I looked around one last time. He wasn't there anymore, but the experience had left its mark. I knew I would never be the same after that day. And the worst part? I knew I wasn't the only person to go through something like this. When I got home, I collapsed onto my bed, finally safe. But what stayed with me was the certainty that the world is sometimes a much scarier place than I had ever imagined. I was in the middle of my shift at Walmart, doing the usual, organizing the electronics shelves, trying to pass the time. Nothing special, just another normal day. Then, out of nowhere, I felt that shiver down my spine, like something was wrong. When I looked up, my heart nearly stopped. There she was, Aline, it had been months since we last saw each other, since we broke up. And let me tell you, it was one of those breakups you just want to forget, you know? But there she was, standing there, looking at me with that smile that, in the past, I found charming, but now sent chills down my spine. I didn't know what to do. My body froze. I tried to pretend I didn't see her, went back to fussing with the shelves as if I was super busy. But I could feel her eyes on me. Every move I made, I knew she was watching, couldn't ignore it. And the worst part was, deep down, I knew this wasn't just a casual encounter. Aline wasn't there just to say hi. I could sense that something was very wrong behind that smile. I continued my work, trying to appear normal, but inside, I was panicking. What did she want? Why now? 1,000 questions raced through my mind, and none of them had an answer that put me at ease. And I knew that somehow this was just the beginning. I tried to avoid Aline for the rest of my shift. Every time I changed sections, she was there, always nearby, pretending to be interested in the products. But I knew it was just an excuse to keep following me. Every time I looked up, there she was, not too far away, always with that same creepy smile. I started to get really nervous, and it didn't take long for my coworkers to notice. One of them even came up to me and asked if everything was okay. I lied, said I was fine, trying not to seem scared, but inside, I was on the verge of a breakdown. When my shift finally ended, I took a deep breath, thinking she had already left. But when I walked out the back door, there she was, leaning against the wall, as if she had been waiting for me the entire time. My heart raced again. I couldn't believe she had stayed there, waiting for me the whole time. She looked me in the eyes, that same intense stare, and gave me a smile that sent a chill through my entire body. I tried not to show the panic I was feeling, walked right past her without saying a word, and headed straight for my car, hoping she wouldn't follow me. When I finally reached the car and got inside, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw she was still there, watching me, as if she was planning her next move. I floored the gas and drove away as fast as I could. I just wanted to get home and forget this had ever happened. But something told me that Aline wasn't going to give up that easily. And deep down, I knew the story was far from over. When I got home, the relief of leaving Aline behind lasted only a few seconds. I parked the car, and as I walked to the door, that uneasy feeling started creeping back. The key trembled in my hand as I inserted it into the lock. When the door opened, I noticed it was slightly ajar. My heart raced again. I walked in slowly, trying to convince myself that I had just forgotten to lock the door before leaving. But after taking a few more steps, my world collapsed. Aline was there, in the middle of my living room, sitting on the couch as if she owned the place. She looked at me with that same eerie smile, as if she had been waiting for me for hours. "I knew you wouldn't be able to avoid me," she said, her voice soft, which only made my fear grow. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. How did she get in? How did she get the key? My mind was racing, trying to understand what was happening. I knew I had to stay calm, but the truth was, I was terrified. I asked her to leave, trying to sound firm, but my voice shook. I told her this wasn't right, that she couldn't just break into my house like that. But Aline just laughed, a light laugh, but filled with something sinister, and started talking as if nothing about this was strange. She said we were still meant to be together, that everything that went wrong was my fault, but she was there to fix things. When I saw that she wasn't going to leave on her own, I tried to grab my phone to call the police. But before I could do anything, she jumped up and grabbed my arm with surprising strength, snatching the phone from my hand. "No one is going to separate us," she said, her eyes burning with a rage I had never seen before. I was trapped in my own house, with someone I barely recognized, and I knew I needed to act fast before things got even worse. Aline gripped my arm with a strength I didn't know she had. I tried to pull away, but the more I struggled, the tighter her hold became. She kept talking, a torrent of words about how everything that went wrong between us was my fault, how she had come here to save us. But all I could think about was how to get out of this situation. She tossed my phone onto the couch and pulled me closer. I looked into her eyes, searching for any trace of the person I once knew, but all I saw was an obsession that chilled me to the bone. There was no more pretending that this wasn't serious. I was in danger, and I needed to act fast. In a split second, I made the only decision that seemed to make sense. I made a sudden move, throwing my weight back, and managed to break free from her grip. Aline stumbled to the side, and I took the opportunity to run towards the bedroom. My only thought was to lock myself in there and call the police. As I ran, I could hear her footsteps right behind me, and the sound of her heavy breathing chased me through the hallways of my own house. When I finally reached the bedroom door, I slammed it shut, feeling the impact of her trying to stop me from locking myself in. But I succeeded. I locked the door, my heart racing, my hands trembling as I tried to dial the police. On the other side of the door, she began pounding hard, yelling my name, saying she wasn't going to give up on us. With every bang, the panic inside me grew. I finally managed to speak to the dispatcher, my voice shaky as I explained what was happening. Those minutes while I waited for the police felt like an eternity. She kept pounding on the door, shouting, and all I could do was sit there, leaning against the wall, trying to control my breathing and hoping this would all end soon. When the police finally arrived, the house was suddenly filled with silence. I heard the front door being broken open, hurried footsteps, and soon after, Aline's voice being taken away, protesting, saying they didn't understand, that I needed her. When I finally stepped out of the bedroom, the house was empty, except for the officers. They asked if I was okay, and all I could do was nod. Aline was gone, but the marks of that encounter were everywhere. The house was silent, but the echo of her words still reverberated in my mind. I knew it was over, but the sense of danger still lingered, like a shadow I couldn't shake. The police took Aline away, but what she left behind didn't go with her. The house was quiet now, but it wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a heavy, tense silence, as if the walls were still absorbing the madness that had happened there. After the police left, I stood in the middle of the living room, looking around, trying to process everything. My mind was a mess, and I couldn't believe that this had really happened. My own home, the place where I was supposed to feel safe, now felt strange, as if it wasn't mine anymore. I walked through the house, seeing things out of place, like the key she somehow got, the phone thrown on the couch. With each step, the reality of what had just happened hit harder. I sat on the couch, the same one where she had been sitting earlier, and the feeling of discomfort washed over me. The house was empty, but I still felt like I was being watched, as if her presence was still there, hiding in the shadows. I tried turning on the TV, putting on some noise to drown out that oppressive silence, but it didn't help. Her words, the way she looked at me, all of it was etched in my mind, and there was no sound that could drown that out. Suddenly, everything felt surreal. How did she get to this point? How could someone I knew so well or thought I knew turn into this? Memories of our relationship flashed through my mind, but they were distorted now, tainted by this night of horror. I went to the bedroom, where I had locked myself earlier. The marks from her pounding on the door were still fresh. I ran my hand over them, feeling the rough texture where the wood had given way slightly, sent a chill down my spine. I knew I would never look at that door the same way again. Finally, I went back to the living room, collapsed on the couch, and stared at the ceiling. Aline was in custody, but what she had done to me wasn't. That night changed everything. The fear, the sense of invasion, the doubt about how it had come to this. I knew it would take time to process everything, to feel safe again, if that was even possible. As time passed, I realized that this story didn't end with the police taking her away. It had left a deep scar, one that I would carry for a long time. And no matter how much I wanted to forget, I knew this experience would follow me, like a shadow, always lurking.